Hello and welcome to Mrs. Givens's first lecture for you in cultural studies class. So we're doing chapter 5. This begins on page 166, and this is going to be section 1. This is my lecture. I would like you to watch my lecture, and after my lecture, go back and read the book. It'll help you. It'll help you understand it while you're reading if you watch my lecture first. So, Judaism and the Jewish people. Judaism is the name of a religion, and people that follow Judaism are called Jewish. And why are we even talking about religion in cultural studies class? Because religion is really big all around the world. And Christianity, I'm sure you've all heard of Christianity. Christianity comes out of the Jewish faith. Do you remember how we talked about the Olmecs and how the Mayans went off this way? And even though they came from the Olmecs, they kind of became their own thing. You couldn't really call them Olmecs anymore. Now they were Mayans. And I also said the same thing happened with the Zapotecs. Well, the same thing happened with Judaism and Christianity. Once upon a time, there was Judaism, and then it got a little bit different and a little bit different and a little bit different and became Christianity. So, and that's why we're learning about this, because there are a lot of Christians on earth, and it's good to know a little bit about, like, well, what are these religions and what do these people believe? Why do they think this way? So here we are. We're not actually going to talk about Christians at all right now. We're talking about their mother religion, which was Judaism. First, I want to make sure you guys kind of understand the timeline. I'm hoping that at this point in math, you've learned about negative numbers. So let's think about time, like years. We're in the year 2020. Let's think about time as negative and positive numbers. So these numbers are the common era on this side of 0. And these are before the common era. Sometimes you see these as BC and AD, but that's old-fashioned, and we don't really do that anymore. It's common era. That's where we live now, is in the common era, and before the common era. So you can think of these as the positive numbers, year 1, year 2, year 3, all the way to where we are right now, year 2020. And then here you've got BCE 1, BCE 2, BCE 3, and I want to take you all the way back to BCE 1700. If we were rounding, we'd go to 2000 here, and we'd go to 2000 here. So there are 2000 years between the year 2000 CE and 0. And there are another 2000 years between 0 and BCE 2000. So we're talking about approximately 4,000 years ago. That's a long time ago, but that's where our story begins. So, about 4,000 years ago, there was this guy named Abraham. And Abraham lived here. Actually, he lived right here in a city that was called Ur. That's U-R, Ur. Everything that you see listed here, these are modern day names, but the names have all changed. This area right here is called the Fertile Crescent. Does anyone know why? Can you imagine why it might be called the Fertile Crescent? Well, because it looks like a crescent. Here's the crescent shape. See this? It looks like a crescent. And the land here was really, really fertile. You could grow really good food. Let me write that down for you. The Fertile Crescent. Go back to my map. So, right about here, see where it says Kuwait? It was a little bit above Kuwait. There was this land called Ur. Abraham was from Ur. And at some point, the story goes, once again, I have to let you know, these are stories. I'm not teaching you this as fact. These are stories that the Jewish faith is based on. So Abraham lived here in Ur, and God told him to move to Canaan. Canaan was a land right about here, right about where it says Israel here is Canaan. So Abraham lived in Ur. God told him to move to Canaan. That's C-A-N-A-A-N. Go back to the map just real quick. So he was here in Ur, and God told him to come here to Canaan. Okay, so that was in about 1700 BCE. BCE stands for Before Common Era. So Abraham, he didn't go by himself. He took all of his people, his whole extended family, anyone that was related to him. That means Abraham's sons, wives, sisters, cousins, daughters, brothers, cousin. They all went to Canaan with him. And when they arrived, God told him that this would be his land forever. This land, the land of Canaan, would always belong to him and his people. And because of that, it was called the Promised Land. So this land right in here that says Israel, that's the modern day name. It was not called Israel at the time, but this land right here is the Promised Land. Abraham was living over here. God told him, take all your people and move over here, and it's going to be your land forever and ever 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 and ever. As long as the earth exists, this land is going to belong to you and your descendants. So, Abraham was around. Then Abraham's son, his name was Isaac. And Isaac's son, his name was Jacob. And Jacob had 12 sons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Jacob had 12 sons. Another weird thing. Jacob, at one point, changed his name to Israel. So Jacob and Israel are the same person. There was Abraham. Abraham had a son named Isaac. Abraham grew old and died. He was an old dude and he died. Isaac had a son named Jacob. Jacob changed his name to Israel and had 12 sons. Those 12 sons started tribes. A tribe is people that are all related to each other. So like Jacob's son, one of Jacob's sons' name is Benjamin. So like, Benjamin's wife and their children and their cousins and their cousins' wives, all those people, everyone that lives with Benjamin and descends from Benjamin is Benjamin's tribe. And there were 12 of them. And all 12 of them became known as the tribes of Israel. The 12, there were 12 of them. So the 12 tribes of Israel. And why are they called of Israel? Because Jacob changed his name to Israel. So they're the 12 tribes that come from Israel. Okay, so there's a book. The Jewish religion, their holy book is called the Torah. Just like if you're Christian, your holy book is the Bible. If you're Muslim, your holy book is the Quran. Maybe you're not religious at all, I don't know, but hopefully you've heard of these books. For the Jewish people, it's the Torah. And in the Torah is made up of 5 books. Those books are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That one's a weird one. Deuteronomy. The 2 books we're going to talk about are Genesis and Exodus, and they tell stories. And that's how the Jewish people today still know what happened so long ago, because stories were written about them. All right. In the last chapter of the book of Genesis, it talks about a famine in Canaan. Famine in Canaan. What is a famine? A famine is when your crops fail. When your crops, that's the food you're growing. When the food you're growing won't grow, well, what happens? There's no food. When there's no food, what happens to the people? I'm sure you can imagine what would happen to people if there were no food. So, Jacob took all of his 12 tribes, to live in Egypt. Because in Egypt, the land was really good. I'm going to go back to the map so I can show you. They were living here in the promised land, and they moved over here to Egypt because there was famine here, but everything was good over here. So let's do a quick little recap. Abraham was here in Ur. God told him to come here to the promised land. Jacob had his son Isaac. Isaac had, wait, I think I just said Jacob. I meant to say Abraham. Abraham had his son Isaac. Isaac had his son Jacob. And Jacob had 12 sons. And those 12 sons all made 12 different tribes. Well, famine broke out here in the promised land, and Jacob took all of his 12 tribes to live over here in Egypt. Okay, so now there are a whole bunch of strangers living in Egypt. And the Pharaoh, that's the king of Egypt, was really uncomfortable having all these foreigners living in his land. And what did he do? He decided to enslave them. He made the king, the Pharaoh of Egypt, made the 12 tribes of Israel slaves. And then the Pharaoh's family adopted a baby named Moses. Moses was an Israelite. Moses was from the tribes of Israel. The Pharaoh's family adopted him. And when Moses grew up, God spoke to him. And God said, Moses, set my people free. Set my people free. And so Moses believed that it was now his job, a commandment straight from God, to get the Israelites freed from slavery. So Moses went to the Pharaoh and was like, hey, Pharaoh, why don't you let my people go? And the Pharaoh was like, hey, Moses, no. And so Moses went and talked to God and was like, hey, God, the Pharaoh says no. And so God sent punishments on the land of Egypt. He sent all kinds of horrible things. He sent plague. That's sickness. He sent sickness. He sent floods. He sent swarms of insects to destroy their plants, their crops. He did awful, horrible things. And Moses went back to the Pharaoh and was like, hey, Pharaoh, why don't you let my people go? You know all this bad stuff that's happening to you? Yeah, dude, God is doing that because you won't let my people go. And the Pharaoh was like, nah, I'm pretty cool with having slaves. I'm going to keep my slaves. Then God did one ultimate thing where God made a plan. He told Moses what he was going to do. And he said, I'm going to kill the firstborn child of every family in Egypt. But listen to this, Moses. Tell your people, tell all your Israelites that what I want them to do is I want them to go and over their doorway at their house, here's a house, over their doorway, I want them to put the blood of a lamb. They put the blood of a lamb over their doorway like this. So God knew to save that child. And God did not kill that child. But he went through and he killed all the firstborn children of every family in Egypt except the Israelites, because they had this blood over their doorway. And when that happened, when the firstborn child of every family in Egypt died, Moses went back to the Pharaoh and was like, dude, come on. God has now killed the firstborn child of every family that you rule over. Let my people go. And he said, okay, cool, go get out of here. And the Pharaoh set them free. So they left, and Moses led them away, and they went to the desert of Sinai. This is pronounced Sinai. They went to the desert of Sinai. And, sorry, I forgot to tell you, this story of them escaping and getting out is the book of Exodus. So the book of Genesis talks about Abraham and then Isaac and then Jacob and all that good stuff. And then once God tells Moses to help set the people free, it switches, and now you're in the book of Exodus. All right. And there's a big holiday, a big Jewish holiday called Passover. And it's celebrated every year. And this is the celebration of when the Jews were freed from Egypt. It's called Passover because God passed over the lamb's blood was here. God passed over the houses of the Jews, or the houses of the Israelites, and they were freed and got to leave. That was in about the year 1200 BCE. Let me draw my little line again. So here's the year 0. Here's us. And I had said Abraham was about 1700. And the Exodus was about 1200. BCE. So now they're going to wander around in the Sinai desert for 40 years. The Israelites lived in the Sinai desert for 40 years. During those 40 years, they developed a religion. They developed really very set rules about how they were to live their lives and the rules they followed and what they believed about God and what they didn't believe about God. And one of those things was monotheism. They believed in one God, monotheism. Mono means one, and theism is God. So they believed in one God. And this was kind of wild and crazy at this time, because at this time in history, in this part of the world, most people believed in many, many, many gods. Lots and lots and lots and lots of gods. But this religion, they believed in one God. They also believed that people were made in God's image. So God made people to be like him. They also believed that to be a good person, You had to act on ethics. What are ethics, Mrs. Gibbons? Thank you for asking. Ethics is your knowledge of right and wrong. Oops, right and wrong. You know what's right and you know what's wrong. And if you want to be a good follower of this religion, you are supposed to choose what's right. And that is acting on your ethics. And all of us have that. You personally, you know right from wrong. And if you choose to act on the right things, then this religion, the religion of the Israelites, would say you're doing the right thing. Okay, so they're traveling for their 40 years in the Sinai desert, and at one point they stopped at the foot of a mountain. This is Mount Sinai. And Moses was still leading them. You know, Moses had talked to the Pharaoh and had gotten them out. And Moses, there was a big camp here of all the people. And Moses went walking up the top of the mountain to talk to God. And while he was up there, God gave him a set of 10 rules to live by. The 10 Commandments. So the Torah itself, that's the book that the Israelites used. The Torah itself has lots of rules in it. But specifically, these 10 are the very most important. They're the ones that God gave directly to Moses on Mount Sinai. So Moses goes back down the mountain, gets his people, and they keep going, trying to get to the promised land, which is, in case you have forgotten, called Canaan. Canaan is the proper name of the land. They call it the promised land because God promised it to Abraham. Oh, so soon after that, Moses died. Moses died. And his kind of second in command guy named Joshua took over control of the Israelites. Now, Moses is gone, bye-bye Moses, and Joshua is in charge. And finally, after 40 years, Joshua leads the 12 tribes of Israel, who, don't forget, Israel is Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel into Canaan. And what happened? Well, it's been a really long time, and now there are other people living in Canaan. And Joshua and the 12 tribes of Israel walk in and they're like, hey, this is our land. You guys got to go. And they're all like, what? We live this. I live here. This is my land. And Joshua's like, no, it's ours. Get out. And they're like, no. So what do you think happened? War happened. And there were big fights, big fights. And the first land that the Israelites won, the Israelites conquered Jericho. It was a big city in Jericho. Yeah, I spelled that correctly. Big city in Canaan called Jericho. That's the first one they won. And then they also they kept winning more and more cities, and eventually the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel now live spread all over Canaan. And let's see. So 12, it's really important to remember there were 12 tribes of Israel. Let me go back to my map. I'm going to blow this up a little bit and maybe a little bit more. Okay, so we were around here. Never mind that this says Israel down here. This is modern day Israel. They were really further up here is where they were. And who were they? 3 tribes settled down here near the Dead Sea. That was Simeon, Benjamin, and Judah. You know what? I'm just going to draw a little map here, and it's going to be crude. Let's say this is Israel. And the Dead Sea is down here, and the River Jordan is up here. Here's the Dead Sea, and this is the River Jordan. Down here, so all the 12 tribes settled here. That's supposed to be an arrow. It's not very good. Okay. Down here near the Dead Sea, the tribe of Judah, Simeon, and Benjamin settled down here. And all the rest of them settled up here. So you've got 9 tribes settled up here near the River Jordan. But they took over the whole land of Canaan. So all the people that had been living here, they're now ruled by the Israelites. And let me check and make sure that I have covered everything. Absolutely, yes. I've covered it all. So that is section 1. I hope that you will now go back and read section 1 in the book, because I'm pretty sure my lecture was good. And as you're reading, you're going to go, oh yeah, Mrs. Giffen said that. And I threw in some extra stuff. There's some extra stuff in here that is not in the book. And I'd like you to know it. Okay, I'm done. I will see you soon in class.